Hello! You will have to pardon Merlin because my neighbors are outside causing a stink at the laundry room, which is like right outside my window, and Merlin is barking because he hears people. He's normally a very good boy, but right now not so much. I love that dog, I really do. The second I talk to my computer, the second he's a stinker. So we have a fun show tonight. We have Brendan Myers on. Merlin, enough. I'm so sorry. Hello, Cheryl. Hi, Megan. So he should be on anyway. I'm so sorry. He's going to be a shit for a while until the neighbors go upstairs. I need to move. 5 more weeks. 5 more weeks. He's singing the song of his people. He's not much of a protecting guard dog. I love him to bits, but yeah. He's just like, people to pet me. Hello, Firefly. And he is such a good boy. All right. So I'm not sure where Bren is yet. Yeah. I love that dog. I really do. Some days. He's matured into a lovely dog. And I mean, he's almost 3. His birthday's next month. Merlin is an Aquarius Pisces cusp. And I think that suits him just fine. I kind of don't want to admit he's an Aquarius. No offense to my Aquarius friends. Hey, Marissa. I'm going to pop on Facebook and just see if Bren has texted me or has messaged me. Excuse me. He has not yet. And I'm still on the old laptop. I have the new one. I haven't set it up yet for StreamYard. Oh, I think he just messaged me. Of course, everything's slow because it's my computer. Okay. Pardon us, technical difficulties. Okay, there we go. Yay, hello, Brendan. Just one moment, I will get the link ready. Okay, so I'm going to send you the invite in Messenger. And just so anyone's wondering, because I know every time I mention Facebook, I get a bunch of requests. You can follow my Facebook tarot page, but as for adding me as a friend, I leave that for people I know, just a boundary thing with me. Okay. You should be able to hop on now without an invitation. There we go. Add to stream.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
All right, I can see you too. Excellent. It's
So
working.
my normally very well-behaved Beagle has decided that he is singing the song of his people because there's people in the laundry room, which is right outside my window. So pardon the Beagle. Merlin wants to say hi too. Okay.
Well, I adore dogs, so it's all good.
Yeah. All right. That's enough, Merlin. Okay. We're not going to play right now. All right. So thank you so much for joining us. I've been looking forward to this for a while. We're going to do this in November originally, and then I'm glad that we rescheduled with timing, although timing at the moment, micro timing is bad, macro timing is good. Okay. So I wanted to tell you the story of my favorite memory of you. I mean, we don't know each other super well, but I can remember at Three Rivers Festival, it would have been 10 years ago.
About that, yeah.
Yeah. I brought my daughter with me, and we were, you and my daughter, because, yeah, she was 11 at the time, or 10, something like that. And you two were having a discussion on the ineffability of the present moment. And
I remember that. I tried out a couple of classic philosophical thought experiments on her, and she did pretty well, right up until I got the prisoner's dilemma. That one stumped her. That's okay. That stumps everybody. So
yeah,
it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I wonder how she'd do now. Yeah, she's okay. We are not playing right now. He brought me his Snoopy, which I realized Snoopy is also a Beagle, and that's kind of cannibalism, but he's like the chillest dog all day long, and then as soon as I go live, he's right in my face. Okay, so yes, tell us about yourself.
Okay, well, I'll say hello. First of all, hello. I see a whole bunch of people saying hi to me in the chat, so hello to all of you. My name's Brendan. You were introducing me as Dr. Brendan Myers. Only my students just call me that when they think they're in trouble, so you can certainly call me Brendan. I'm from a small town in southwest Ontario, but now I live in West Quebec, in just on the edge of the city of Gatineau. In fact, right across the road from my house is the beginning of the Gatineau Hills National Park. So I really do live next door to a forest. In fact, it starts here and goes on for 300 more kilometers. What else can I tell you? I used to play guitar. I used to be good at it. I still sort of play. I lived in Ireland for many years. That's where I did my PhD, as a matter of fact. And although it is, the land of saints and scholars, the land of standing stones and magic, it was also the place where I did my PhD. It was also the land of mobile phones and motorways, after all. It's a modern place. And I did my studies there on the philosophy of climate change and future generations. Largely because I thought that was, an important thing. Well, it is still, of course. Yeah. Also because I had grown up in an Irish family. My dad was born in Ireland, so I had Irish mythology and storytelling and music and food and even politics, for that matter, in my household from a very, very early age. So, of course, going to my father's country and to make it my own for a little while was a very important thing for me. And so while I was there, in addition to doing my research, I also met a number of friends and traveled up and down the country. I visited almost all 32 counties. I think that I missed Waterford and some of the counties in the north. I missed No, I drove through Armagh. I did get Armagh. And I missed Roscommon. And actually, I'm kind of regretting that one because that's the county where a place called Rathcrogan is located. That was the ancient royal seat for the West Province, for Connacht, where Mabel used to live. And I had this idea in my head that, well, it's just like only an hour's drive away from where I live in Galway, so I'll just go whenever I want to. And then I never did. So let that be a lesson to me and to all of you. Meanwhile, I also wrote a number of books that I got published shortly after I finished. And the first of which is actually out of print now, and it's fine. It can stay out of print. It was not that good. But at least it got me started, as it were. And Somebody just said in the chat that I picked up accents from all over. I have what you might call the transatlantic accent because I grew up in Canada, but I had Irish people in my household in my family, and then I went to live there as well. So I have
Mm.
a couple of loan words and sounds from both countries in a way. So
Yeah,
nobody knows what I'm talking about.
yeah. You almost have a slight hint of a conclave accent.
Oh, really? A compliment?
Not quite, but yeah. If you had told me that you were from the East Coast, I wouldn't question you.
Well, if it happened, I used to live in Newfoundland as well.
Okay, well
I
there
lived
you
in
go.
Newfoundland just only for a few months actually. I lived mostly in the suburb of St. John's, and I spent a lot of that time playing guitar, going to pubs, and
Yeah.
hiking around, and I spent a lot of time on Signal Hill, on the other side of the city.
I've been told that if you want to go to Ireland and you can't afford it and you're Canadian, go to Newfoundland.
Go to Newfoundland.
The dollar's the same, but the culture's similar.
Similar enough. There were people who spoke Irish in Newfoundland.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
it was part of England until 1949, wasn't it?
It was an independent nation until 1949, and then it joined Canada.
Okay.
I don't remember when it got its independence from the UK, but it got Newfoundland joined Canada on the 1st of April, 1949.
Okay.
But the country hasn't got the joke yet, you see. At any rate, I am now the author of 19 books.
19, yeah.
And there are 3 more coming out in 22.
Okay, are they fiction or nonfiction?
I'll start with the nonfiction then. So I'll start with the book that this was my 3rd published book, but it was the one that, in a way, that got me onto a spiritual and philosophical way of thinking that continues to inform my life and all of my subsequent books as well. So, see this shelf behind me? See the top shelf? All my published works, all of them, and some of these ones as well. So that's how much I work.
2 weeks ago, I had another author on the show, and we were talking about the courage to write and how essentially her story was that she was in an unhappy marriage. She was in an unhappy career. She was on the 401. So I know that you know people in London, so you're familiar with the 401. And someone was driving the wrong way down the 401 and almost hit her head on. And she had this flash of like, I don't want to die right now. I can't die right now. And there's so many things I want to do with my life. And so she went home and thought about things. And soon after that, ended her unhappy marriage, took her 3 kids, and they were sleeping on a mattress. And then she became wildly successful as an artist, doing like fan art, and started writing and has written several books. And
Wonderful.
So I need to write. I have several books that are in here and need to get on here that don't happen yet. But yeah, so I have some of your books. That are
wonderful too. You have them behind you on the display there as well.
Yeah. No, that wasn't done on purpose. That's happenstance because they are alphabetical. So you're right between The Red-Haired Girl from the Bog by Patricia Monahan and Red Dwarf.
Well, I'm in good company.
Yeah, I think if I was going to put you anywhere, which is right beside John O'Donoghue's Anamkara. So, I mean, really, if I was to place you as a person anywhere, it would probably be between Red Dwarf and
maybe.
And
I'm happy with that, as a matter of fact. The story I was going to tell you. So this was my 3rd published book. And this is the one that, as I mentioned, got my my way of thinking as it is now kind of started. Actually, I should tell you the story of how that happened.
Where is my
because I was living in Ireland, but I was visiting all kinds of places, and I went to visit a place in Hessen in Germany called Vogelsberg, and a couple of small towns there. I was I was very much in love with a German woman at the time, and I was going down to visit her. So while I was there, the 2 of us went walking and hiking around the hills in the area. Vogelsberg means the bird mountains, right? And it's a national park. So and we got stuck in a thunderstorm, a really severe thunderstorm. And we were a good hour or more of walking distance away from the town. So we were kind of worried about our safety. And Germany is like Tornado Alley of Europe, right? All the mountains and the landscapes where all the terrible weather goes.
Okay.
And so we were quite, we were quite worried. And but it was also in another way a transformative experience for me. It kind of reminded me that nature is always going to be greater and more powerful and wider than any one person's ability to grasp and understand.
Right.
That however much we explore the world, there will always be more to explore. That however well you know someone else, it is always possible for them to surprise you.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, however well you know yourself, it is also possible for new discoveries to emerge from, well, we could call it the unconscious, we could call it the spirit, we could call it, even the future and the past for that matter. So, nor was that the only such place where I had this feeling and this experience. And it grew on me in the days that followed getting stuck in that thunderstorm, as well as a couple of weeks later, back in Ireland, visiting a place on Aran Island called Dunangus, which is an old Neolithic ring fort, and which is right on the edge of the island. And in fact, it's kind of a crescent-shaped ring fort like that, because the top edge over here is actually a cliff over the ocean, a 700-foot cliff over the ocean.
Wow.
It's taller than Cliffs of Moher, even though the Cliffs of Moher are photographs. Maybe because it's easier to drive up to them or something. So overlooking the ocean, even on bad days, even when the weather was shite, because it's always crap, and especially in the West, and reminded me about it reminded me of a line from William Butler Yeats's very marvelous prologue to a book called Gods and Fighting Men by his friend Lady Augusta Gregory, in which he talks about how natural immensity has this ability to inspire people.
Mm-hmm.
So the word immensity came to mean something very significant to me. It's an event or an experience in life that is in some sense inevitable. Everybody has to encounter it eventually.
Mm-hmm.
The magnificence of the earth is one such encounter. The otherness of other people is a second. The depths of one's own solitude and loneliness is a third. The inevitability of our deaths is a fourth. And the complexity and the possibility of mathematically emergent properties in ecosystems is a fifth. And it goes on like that. Those five are the ones that I tend to emphasize in my work, but they can certainly be more. At any rate, this is the book that I wrote following those experiences, in which I attempt to explain what I now call the theory of the immensity, or the call of the immensity. The idea is that this is a way of thinking about the flourishing life and the good and beautiful life, the spiritual life, that is, first of all, potentially cross-cultural, because everybody, no matter who they are, no matter what language they speak, is going to have to, live upon the earth, meet with their fellow human beings, deal with their own solitude, and eventually die. There's just no escaping that for anyone.
Mm-hmm.
It's also not necessarily transcendental. So someone who is a hardcore atheist could still grasp the spiritual significance of this occasion.
Right.
And finally, it is configuring of the life, because one of the features of the immensity is that it calls to you. It's like this kind of an event or situation whose presence is, in effect, or pedagogically speaking, a demand that you have to rethink yourself. That you have to kind of put the hubris in check, because here comes an event that will always overcome it, every time. And you have to make a choice and a decision. It's often a life-changing decision, the kind of decision that will cause the direction of your life to take off in a new way, irreversible way. So, like, if this was a story, it would be a plot twist, right?
Yeah. If
this was a track in the road, it's a fork, and you can only go forward and never go back and never second guess. So, this is, I think, the foundation of an ethical but also metaphysical way of thinking. Our lives are always configured by the immensities. Now, how do we respond to the important thing? Oh, sorry.
Over the past 2 years, especially, we have been, I think in general in our society, we are trying to ignore these five immense problems. And over the past 2 years, especially with quarantine, we haven't had as much access to the depth of dealing with other people and of learning about other people. And we've been inside and not, learning about our environments. And so our environments are very controlled and very safe. And we have been battling loneliness by trying to deal with like social media as trying to fill this void and ignore the fact that we are alone and our life is ticking by one moment at a time. And we're dealing with the deaths of many people through this pandemic. So I can really see how all five of those have been things that we have been trying to pretend don't exist over the past century, maybe, but especially in the past 2 years.
Yeah, I think I quite agree. I mean, I live alone here in my home. I live by myself, and although my partner comes to visit as often as she can, we have a little bubble so that we can keep ourselves safe.
Mm-hmm.
Still, a trying thing for me and for both of us, and I think it has brought to a kind of an unignorable height, a peak of significance that we have to isolate at home in order to keep ourselves safe, and yet the things that we do to stay safe are also so painful.
Mm-hmm.
In the absence of other people with whom we can banter and enjoy friendship and things, in the absence of the ability to do all the normal social things that we could do, not only among our friends and families, but also at work, or people losing their jobs or getting thrown out of their homes, we suddenly find ourselves compelled in a way to look at ourselves, right? Because we can't look out to others quite as well because we're not allowed to be part of their lives in the same way. Can't go to social events the same way. So we have to look at ourselves. And then people suddenly find, gosh, there's an enormous void there.
Yeah.
There's an enormous hole. There's this gigantic, monstrous abyss that people do whatever it takes to ignore.
And we try to fill it through, arguing with strangers on social media or potato chips or whatever. And I have found that having a dog has helped profoundly with dealing with that loneliness, because I'm in a new city. I moved to Hamilton about a year and a half ago. And so, like the people who I know and I'm familiar with and could have in a bubble are not near me. So that's been challenging as well. And I can see how many of us try to ignore that and are suddenly faced with some very big things and big ideas that we haven't had to deal with before.
Yeah, indeed. So, I mean, loneliness is painful for people and deeply distressing, and yet I think it's not the problem as such, really. The problem is all the ridiculous things people do to avoid loneliness. All the self-destructive things, in fact, all the things that people do in order to pretend that they're not a single solitary person compelled from time to time to face their life, to face their own history and to face their own future.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've just noticed someone in the chat saying that they're an introvert. So that person says, I think the last few years have really shown people's true colors. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I'm an introverted person myself most of the time. But even I'm having trouble with the lockdown,
I wonder about your background's philosophy, mine's in psychology. So I wonder, as a species, we are programmed to be a tribal species, and we're wired for connection, as Brene Brown says, and so we should be more extroverted. And if you look at statistics, we tend to be, as a species, more extroverted. There are people who are truly introverted, but it's become incredibly trendy in the past 10 years to identify as an introvert. Number one, based on like a lot of pop culture personality tests. And it got me to think, like, why is this all of a sudden all of these people are identifying as introverted, when as a species that's really counterintuitive to how we should be, because being alone is something that's very new in our species. So I wonder if it's not really introversion as much as it is maladaptive social skills. So most people say, when I'm around other people, it burns me out, therefore I must be an introvert. But if you haven't developed those core social skills at a young age, and if we're filling that void with social media as a substitute for human connection, would that mean that because it's hard work for us to be social, that's leading to more people to identify as introverted, when really they're just an average extroverted person and not the exception to the rule, which is probably a great idea for a master's thesis should I ever go back to school.
Yeah, I'm inclined to come with you in that part of the way. I don't know that there are such things as a hardcore introvert or extroverts, really. I think that there is a kind of a spectrum, perhaps. There's, as you say, we are in a social species, and we generally flourish best when we cooperate with one another. Mm-hmm. And yet some people have a harder time with it than others, I just said a moment ago, I'm an introverted person, and yet I work one of the most extroverted jobs you can possibly think of. I'm a college professor. I have to deal with people all day, So harder to do during the lockdown as well, because I teach through Zoom, which is alienating and disillusioning for students who go through that.
And I think of somebody like Thoreau. So for those of you in the chat who aren't aware of who Henry David Thoreau is, he was an author in the turn of the last century-ish.
Right at the time of the post-American Civil War, as a matter of fact, 1860s to 70s. He was
okay, all right, so
during that period.
Before then, but he very much talked about his relationship with nature, and the line that most people are familiar with is, "I went into the woods to live deliberately, to put to death all that was not life," and I should Google that.
I've got a copy of the book over there. I'll go and get it later, maybe. But I know
even though he was alone, it was still about developing this relationship with the woods, and I'm sure that he would talk to the trees and squirrels and birds and whatnot. So even though there weren't people around, there was still connection.
Well, he wrote about it in the book, right? He wrote it. And the book was called Weldon, and he wrote about the 2 years that he spent living mostly alone on the shores of Lake Weldon, which is in Connecticut. Pardon me, no, it's in Massachusetts. And although he was still not that far from a town called Concord, so he was still able to visit people from time to time, receive visitors, receive the mail, even had his family do his laundry for him. So he was not totally isolated from human company, but he did spend large stretches of time with no people around. And I've done that a few times in my own life as well. I've gone to some, mostly secluded natural place, not to spend 2 years at a time, because I just don't know how to grow my own food for that long, especially in this climate where we have snow and winter for so long. But I have gone, 30 or 40 days without talking to anybody, and I've found that both enlightening and at the same time, deeply excuse me, difficult to find the word for it. It's enlightening and it's satisfying, but it's also very frustrating. There were some days in which I felt, deeply, related to and connected with the landscape. But there were other times I just was craving a bag of chips like you wouldn't believe. So, in fact, the monasticism as a religious practice doesn't really enter human life until the Buddha and also Christianity as well. Prior to those religious movements, people were, exile was regarded as a type of punishment for a criminal.
Yeah, and those who choose a life of exile are like, the hermits living in the woods are often considered to be unwell, and it's not a sign of healthiness if you're just like, screw society, I'm going to go live in the woods for the rest of my life. I actually have planned to do this. I need to ask, of course, but our friends up at Raven's Knoll, I was going to ask if my birthday's in May, and hopefully there's nobody needing the campsite Mother's Day weekend, but I was going to ask if I can like stay in the cottage for a week and just write in my journal, and because there's no internet connection up there really, and I think that would be such a good experience. I've never been completely alone for a week. I've always had my dog, or there's pizza delivery guy or whatever. So I think that there's so much we can learn about ourselves when we learn to listen to ourselves. And
so
to be quiet.
Many of the most important religious insights in the history of religion, not only in paganism, but all over the world, were accomplished by people who had entered solitude quite deliberately. The life of Jesus is one well-known example. He goes into the desert for 30 days and nights by himself, but he wasn't the only one. The Buddha did it for months on end at a time. The Confucius, though with a handful of followers, went into exile voluntarily for 14 years. Incredible stuff like that.
And you look at Seneca's exile. It was Seneca, right? Who was exiled? Am I getting the right one?
The Roman philosopher?
Yes.
He was exiled. He was allowed back. Then he was exiled again, and then he was ordered to commit suicide by Emperor. Which one was it now? I think
Nero.
I think it was Nero. That's right. For mouthing off in public the way that philosophers do. It's actually dangerous to be a philosopher. We have a terrible habit of trying to speak what we are best able to perceive as the truth, and getting in trouble with political authorities for it. That's kind of the nature of the profession in a way.
Yeah, and still happening today.
Still happening today.
The cost isn't near as high in our society and in our specific culture of speaking out against the government, but certainly there are in other countries. Oh gosh, what's his name? Alexei, Russian guy, Putin's adversary, who's
I forgot exactly what you mean. Yeah, he more or less jailed for a long time and then thrown out of Russia and on all kinds of trumped up charges.
Yeah.
Socrates himself also, brought up on trumped up charges that he wasn't really guilty of, and sentenced to death by his community, because that's how they ran justice back then.
Yeah.
And by the way, spent huge amounts of time alone too, just thinking, and even his friends would kind of wonder about whether he was well, because he used to spend a lot of his time just standing on cliff sides, looking over the ocean, thinking, all day.
And then there's those times when we think we're alone, and then there's those signs of life, signs that someone else has been here before. Now, I mean, I've read your book, so so tell us about those standing stones and the Inuksuks, and how that would relate to.
I'll bring the copy of the book out for it here. It's this one right here.
This one right here.
And you have your copy too. How about that? This is, it's a downer of a title, isn't it? Loneliness and Revolution. Who wants to read a book about that? It's like, sadness and how it can inspire you. Like, it's kind of an absurd title. But it is the book I am most proud of, as a matter of fact. And I got the idea in part because of the insights we've just been discussing. But also, I had just come back to Canada at about the time that the book was in progress. And that was also at about the time when the territory of Nunavut was created. So the Inukshuk is on the flag, and everybody's building Inukshuks in their gardens and on the sides of highways. And a friend of mine, my partner at the time, and I drove across Canada. We drove from Kamloops, BC, in BC. Pardon me, not Kamloops. From the Okanagan Valley, anyway. We drove from the Okanagan all the way to Ottawa. We took 11 days to do it, and we met lots of fun and wonderful people on the way. And people are building Inukshuks all over the place, all around the highways and on hilltops and things. So I found out what the Inukshuk means to the Inuit people who build them, because I thought it must have some kind of significance to them that might be lost on white people like us. So it turns out there's a kind of a code. Right? If it's just a heap of rocks, it means that there is some water nearby. If it's a heap of rocks and 2 arms, it means there's food nearby, a survival cache, right, for people who might be lost or might be too far from home or something like that. And it means that there's some kind of survival supply depot nearby. And if it has a head, it means a settlement. There's people. So I thought, this is marvelous, though, because it also means that if you happen to be going through a landscape like the far north, where there are very few roads and very few telephone poles and very few settlements, very few signs of human life, and yet you might come across one of these cairns, one of these Inukshuks, it means we are here, right? There are people here, or people at least who come by here often enough to replenish these survival depots. Mm-hmm. Means that you now live in an inhabited landscape, and it's not so bleak after all. And isn't that an awful lot like all of us, the human race here on Earth, in the great ocean of the cosmos, which is, after all, billions and billions of light years of mostly empty space. And we live in this little tiny, razor-thin oasis of an habitable atmosphere in this enormously, unimaginably humongous, vacuum of outer space. And I just found that the most astonishing thought. So I ended up meditating upon that for a long while. And I came upon first of all, the insight.
Cheryl is.
Go ahead.
Cheryl is one of my moms, and she is initially from southern U.S. and is now living in Europe and isn't sure what an Inukshuk is. So I'm going to try to show an image.
Okay.
Pardon me for a moment as I think I can share a screen and then come back here. Marissa is in Northern Ontario, so she
Or
certainly
in
made
the chat,
available.
yeah, tourists tend to steal them. Yeah, I've seen that happening as well. Tourists who go up to the far north are encouraged not to build their own because it throws off those survival signals that people who live
Yeah.
there need.
And I can't do this. I have a new laptop I need to switch to because this one has like no RAM. But anyway, Cheryl, I'll send you a photo of one. But yeah, they're humongous. So you've of course seen the pictures of megaliths in Europe, so like Stonehenge and things like that, where there's these massive rocks, and Easter Island has the big faces. So these are like giant stick men that are massively tall, and they're built out of rocks.
Yeah,
That's kind of how I can describe them
yeah,
best.
yeah. I began to wonder if they had been, if in addition to the survival signaling and meaning that Inukshuks have, if they also have this, function of making a landscape inhabited and thereby less lonely, and that's good for everybody's mental health as well as for their survival. And might that be the same reason why my own ancestors, the Celts of Ireland, built standing stones and built dolmen and built rings? It also, has practical purposes, right? They're burials, a lot of them, but also they make a landscape that is otherwise might look very empty and very bleak and foreboding. It makes that landscape appear inhabitable. And now we know that there are people nearby, and now we need not feel so lonely anymore, even if you're the only human being for 30 kilometers in any direction, as I sometimes was living in the West, living in Connemara.
Mm-hmm. So, and certainly both the traditional Celtic culture and indigenous cultures have a strong history of a strong tradition of hospitality. So if you are lost and wandering in the woods and starving, chances are high someone's going to take you in if they find you and feed you and give you a seat by the fire, and you're going to be okay. Whereas today, I mean, there's an encampment of people half a block from my house, and if one of them knocked on my door, I'd probably call the police. So it's very different than
we don't
than
know
many of our ancient cultures would do.
Yeah. So I hit upon these ideas that loneliness is kind of everywhere, that people will do all kinds of insane and self-destructive things to avoid them. And yet it isn't really the problem. It's the destructive things we do to avoid it that is the problem. And it also occurred to me that, but some of the things that we do to alleviate loneliness are also enactments of presence, like the construction of Inukshuks and standing stones. And from that, you can extrapolate further to almost any kind of art, right? And the best way to see this is listening to music that is performed in a language that you don't understand, so that you don't know what's being said, and it could be anything. But you will at least know that something is being said, and whatever else the meaning is, it must necessarily, like logically necessarily, convey the meaning of there is a human presence here. You can summarize that in the simple proposition, I am here. So even if it happens, no one can understand the language of English that you and I are speaking, someone dropping into the chat here would see, here's two people speaking, here's a human presence, here's somebody saying, I am here.
Michael Stipe of REM and Bjork have both experimented with just like singing and making sound that aren't necessarily words. So they're more interested in this art form of conveying emotion than they are conveying a linguistic message. And I think that's really fascinating, that because we always think about lyrics have a meaning, and when we hear when we hear music in a foreign language, it doesn't necessarily have a meaning to us. And this is a way that they were able to get that experience for themselves, even with their own music.
Yeah, I got that idea, in fact, listening to Lisa Gerard, one half of Dead Can Dance, who also performs music in a nonsense language of her own creation. It's just phonemes with no linguistic content, but nevertheless tells us something about her feelings and her spirit. And she herself has in interviews have described it as a kind of an angelic music that she's almost channeling in a way.
Yeah, I like Dead Can Dance. I haven't thought about them in 10 years probably.
They put out a couple of new albums in the last few years, as a matter of fact.
Nice.
And they're excellent.
Nice. Enya has made up a few languages of her own. So it is actually a language, but it's one that only she understands. And so she sang in some of these obscure languages. And she's
Yeah.
someone who is kind of a self-imposed hobbit or hermit, like hobbit.
Alone in this.
Hermit. So she lives alone in this big house and doesn't really have contact with other people and makes up languages. So
Yeah.
what is
So
that
does,
as a way to cope with loneliness?
Jonesy, the lead singer of Sigur Rós, he also sings in an invented language, but he gave his invented language a name. He called it Victorylandish.
I like it.
I like it too. So the point is, some of the things we do to alleviate loneliness transcend language boundaries and hence cultural boundaries too. And you have to enact the proposition, I am here, in addition to whatever other meaning they're trying to convey. And that makes the world just that little bit less lonely. And then having enunciated the I am here, it can move to the next one, which is, this is what I am, right? The statement also tells us something about our identity in a practical way. And then and also the fact of communicating with the hope of hearing an answer and hope of having an audience affirms values too. So the third movement becomes, what I am is beautiful. But of course, we do hope for a response, and part of the reason we make art is to in the hope of a response, and hope of a dialogue and conversation of a sort, community and the like. So the fourth and final movement is anyone else out there? And I think that almost everything that we do in art being the emblematic activity, but also in religion and spirituality, also in engineering and technology and science, also in my own field, philosophy, also in all kinds of things. We are in various ways enacting these four propositions. I am here. This is what I am. What I am is beautiful. Is anyone else out there?
You'd enjoy the show, the interview I had just before Christmas. I had a Christmas historian on who studies the modern history of Christmas, so like Dickens forward, and how she believes that all art is political in some way. And if you were to classify art as anything that you make exist that didn't exist before, then if all of that has some sort of meaning and all of that conveys some sort of political message, then that says a lot about who we are as
Indeed,
people,
yeah.
And how we communicate.
Well, there's one way in which I think that's quite correct. Anybody who makes art, for any kind of art in any place, has to presuppose some kind of space where others in the public can come and see it, some kind of public sphere. And that's a political act, right? The act of creating a space where others who are strangers to you can enter, and everyone who enters is part of a kind of a public experience. That's a political act. And that's quite distinct from whether or not we are making a statement about how society is organized or who we should vote for or why this corporation or that politician is evil. Just the mere creation of a public space in which to produce something of beauty for anyone is in its own way a kind of political act.
Very few people know this about me, but I actually went to art school. So you're familiar with London. I went to the big art school in London, Beagle,
Yep.
And my daughter was conceived right after I graduated, and I just stopped making art. But I remember one of my art teachers saying something along the lines of, since the beginning of human civilization, we have not been able to stand the look of a blank wall, and we always want to decorate it. So he was a big fan of what he called urban wall art or urban art, being graffiti. And I mean, we see that as being, illegal, and it's a defacement, but it's also a decorating. And from early cave paintings to the Sistine Chapel to, a guy with a spray paint can, some of that art is still, I mean, it's a tag. I mean, what is it other than I was here?
Exactly. Yeah.
Sometimes it's literally I was here, and in
sometimes exactly those very words, Killer, I was here, right?
Yeah. Hagia Sophia. There was the berserkers who were hired from the Norselands to guard Hagia Sophia. One of the Vikings wrote in runes like something like Olaf was here or something like that, and carved it in there today.
On the Hagia Sophia, yeah. So I think that this fourfold, movement of the phenomenology of presence is the foundation of, certainly art, certainly spirituality, also politics now, as we've just described. In fact, it's hard for me to think of something that it isn't bounded into, because whatever else it is that we are doing it in the hope of enacting a presence, right? Reaching out to someone and trying to find collaborators in our conversation to make the world less lonely.
Well, the deliberate creation of anything that is not for our immediate physical survival is part of what makes us human. No other animal really does that. I mean, there are apes and primates who are raised in captivity who will, have a paintbrush and make marks, or there's been elephants who've done that. But that's just really mimicking what humans have done. However, from the age of 18 months or so, you give a toddler a crayon and they know what to do and they're making their mark. And that's something that is so intrinsically human to create.
Yeah. But even some of what we do for the sake of survival is also part of this, I think, as well, especially cooking, right?
True.
We are the only species that cooks our food. Every other living thing on Earth, they just eat it wild. We cook it, and the course of cooking it is a social act, right? It's how we gather, it's how we prepare, it's how we share. I mean, if we eat merely for survival, we may as well just inject nutrients into our bloodstreams with needles. But we don't do that because we also enjoy the community activity, the way we share food with one another, giving food, taking food, eating it together, talking about it, preparing it, cleaning up after. All of those things are social things, and they bond us and they make us closer together. It's just hard to argue with and be mad at someone with whom you're sharing food.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I have really found with any Islamic people that I've known. You want to talk about stereotypes? Every single Muslim person I know has been obsessed with feeding me. In their culture, like eating alone, if you have to eat alone and you've been exiled to eat alone, there's something really wrong. So a friend of mine, she's a Canadian-born white lady. She's a substitute teacher, and so she got a contract at the local Islamic high school, and the students would bring her food all the time, and if they saw that she was eating alone at her desk, they'd pull up a chair and eat with her.
Oh, wow.
And as a PSW, I was doing home care, and I had a client who was Muslim, and part of my duties were to make her breakfast, and she would always say, and make some for yourself too, and that's kind of a boundary issue for me coming into her home as a professional, is that I'm not allowed to eat. But then I think of the Celtic culture and the myth of the Dagda and the big hole in the ground and the birth of Angus. So I don't feel that I can refuse food that's been offered to me. So here she is thinking that she can't not offer me food.
Yeah, she kind of has to. My partner is Jewish, by the way. They eat everything as well. They're constantly feeding me and feeding me and feeding me.
Yeah.
It's the love, it's as well as how they show solidarity and kindness.
Yeah. Let me tell you, iftar leftovers, she would save them for me. And she'd be like, yeah, so I'd be getting ready to go for the day. And she's like, oh, by the way, your lunch is on the top shelf of the fridge. Yeah, during Ramadan, when they had their iftar, so their breaking of the fast after sunset, the whole family would get together and eat. And she'd save me the leftovers.
Oh, wonderful.
And, my God, so good. So good.
Yeah.
And I think that food is the easiest way if you want to teach someone about your culture. Food is probably the easiest way to do that.
Yeah.
I remember that
when
my daughter was little, we'd make
it's in the landscape.
Yeah, we would make
language we speak, all those things bound into the way we eat. So, but these are the kinds of social experiences we have not been able to have during the pandemic, after all. So it has closed us off from some of the more healthy ways that we can deal with our loneliness and go into it and find inspiration in it. And so instead, we've been reverting back to the unhealthy ways of dealing with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, getting ourselves addicted to social media arguments, or addicted to junk food, or or people's anxieties are spiking, or people's substance abuses level are spiking. This is in addition to a public health crisis. It's also a massive mental health crisis.
Right.
And for a couple of generations, I think.
I can't remember if you mentioned it in Loneliness and Revelation, because it's been a while since I read it, but the risk factor for single men who don't have friends, because making friends with other men is difficult, and it's actually like a health risk. statistically of men who don't have connections.
Yeah, yeah.
I
I
mean, we
think
live in a culture where men aren't allowed to hug and men aren't allowed to be close to each other, and
yeah, because if we
that keeps
if
people
a man,
separate. So, like, I can remember.
says to another straight guy that I love him, most people would mean that that's me signaling that I was gay or something like that, and then there's taboos around that, and depending on whom I'm talking to, I suppose it doesn't have to be like that, and wasn't always historically either. Something happened, 150 years ago, and I'm not quite sure what, but suddenly men were not allowed to be affectionate with one another anymore. And this is the reason why men have shorter lifespans than women. As a matter of fact,
Mhm.
the more reckless lifestyles that men tend to follow. We're more likely to die in car accidents, for example, more likely to die of suicide.
Yeah, and then when we see a healthy male friendship of two men being affectionate and just being platonic, there's all these um, assumptions that are made, and like, I think about Patrick Stewart and Sir Ian McKellen.
Well,
It was
yeah,
a beautiful romance, and oh gosh, Stephen Fry and Hugh Lowry are also best friends, and I
oh,
love seeing them
wonderful.
together. We need more examples of that, and you always see guys like, in the first Bill and Ted movie, they hug and they carry away from each other. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
they
true.
have
They're
to say
absolutely
no
fucking
homo or whatever, and my I tried this again. My dad has never told me that he loves me in those words because he doesn't have that vocabulary. My dad loves me. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But my dad will say, "When's the last time you checked the oil in your car? When's the last time you checked your tires? How are you doing for groceries this week?" So, and I just kind of tested that. And I've done this a few times where I've said, "Dad, I love you." I said, "Well, what do you want?" I just love you. I don't want anything. And he's like, "Well, no, I care about all my girls," but he just can't bring himself to say that four-letter L word, and it's a real symptom of that toxic masculinity that we
I
can't
suppose so.
talk to
Yeah,
each other.
yeah. I suppose that's very plausible. Well, one of my oldest and best friends in the world is a fellow who I believe is associate of yours as well, Greg Curry, and I've known him for nearly 30 years now.
Yeah,
We
I
don't
don't
have
know. I don't know Greg super well. I know well enough to say hi to him, but
yeah,
yeah, it
yeah.
seems like
The kind of friendship I have with him, I'm also aware I can't have with just anybody because we don't
mhm.
live in a society that rewards that or encourages it or even understands it a lot of the time. Anyway, but the kinds of problems that men have are, I think, still quite small compared to what most women have, what most indigenous people or immigrants to this country have, or gay and lesbian people. I have many friends who are gay, but I don't know what it's like to have their experience of life, and I never will. But I am aware that they
True,
suffer
but
way more than you.
I
And
think that it all stems from, not all of it, but I think a lot of it stems from that same idea of that colonial patriarchy, and that can be extended to and I don't want to simplify these problems, but a lot of the problems that women have in relation to operating in the world, or how immigrants, or how gay people, how the LGBT community in general deals with and the troubles that they have and the trials that they have are kind of related to the same issue of why two men are not allowed in our society to hug, of this this idea of this rugged individual
yeah,
colonial man, and it's very sad, and I am very thankful to see that the generation younger than ours seems to really be tackling this issue. um, my daughter is 21 now, and her high school was the first high school in Canada to have gender neutral bathrooms.
oh,
It's
wow.
very common first day of class for the teacher to ask what everyone's preferred pronouns are. So, and there's also, this is also the first generation to really stand up against bullying, to say, like, no, this is not going to be a part of who we are as engaging in this kind of behavior.
Yeah, and I do see that in my students at the college here as well, because the college I teach at, it's a CEGEP in Quebec. Most of our students come to me at 17 and they finish at 19 or 20, so they're right at that same age group.
Hmm.
And yeah, they're less tolerant of bullying. They're more open to different ways of thinking and living and loving. And an estimated 1/6 of them are somewhere on the LGBTQ field. 1/6. It's kind of an incredible number, you know.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so when I finished writing Loneliness and Revelation, I should say that this was originally begun as the prologue or the introduction to another larger book, but it grew so large by itself that my publisher
You mean this one?
printed on its own, and that's the other half, yeah. So that's what it originally was, and it got split into two. So that book that you just held up, it's called Circles of Meaning, Labyrinths of Fear. And I thought could be a really practical way to try to encourage, develop, and promote a more spiritually and psychologically healthier culture, I thought. Let's do something really simple and straightforward that most anyone can understand. Identify 21 types of relationships and see what's wonderful about them and encourage them and not to set them apart from other kinds of relationships as such, because they're all important. But if we can identify 21, that's easy in the imagination to grasp. And we can see, what kind of virtues go into sustaining and improving and, and living them. And I think that's kind of a healthy, simple, straightforward way to live. So from simple relationships like, families, let's say, the siblings and parents, to more complicated relationships like the kind that artists have with audiences, or that soldiers have with one another, or that we all have with the gods. 21 straightforward relationships that if only we learn just those 21, in fact, not even all 21, you could just pick a dozen or even less and focus on them, whichever ones that they are, then you're much more likely to have a flourishing life, much more likely to lead the kind of life you'd be proud of at the end. And you wouldn't, meet your death feeling as if you were missing out on anything.
Mm-hmm. So we're getting close to the end of the hour. Tell us about your new book.
I've got several, actually. My most recent published book is actually a novel, and I'll bring that one up for you now. I've written 6 novels. I don't
have that one yet.
The most recently published one is this one. It's called The Book of Urania, and this is a novel that imagines... what's that? Oh, yeah.
Gorgeous this is cover.
A limited edition hardcover, by the way. Only 18 hardcover copies were made. Only 18 will ever be made. So you have to go to the publisher if you want one before it's too late. Everybody else gets... Urania is one of the 9 muses from Greek mythology. She's the muse of astronomers, mathematicians, and philosophers. So I had this idea, what if she's still around? And what if she works with and inspires all the Renaissance mathematicians and scientists that you read about in history class? Galileo, Isaac Newton, Nicholas Copernicus, Nicola Webb, all those. There are a lot of guys, but there's a lot of women during this period as well that we don't read about in history, who I also included in the story, like for example, Catherine de Medici, who was Queen of France at one time, and the singers in the Concerto della Donna. Whose mistress, a woman named Tarquina Molza, taught them all how to read and how to do mathematics and how to do science. Most women, even upper class women, didn't get that kind of education. But Tarquina used to women who had good singing voices in order to give them a job, a place to live, and teach them their numbers. So I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if Urania, the goddess, is still communicating with all of these scientists and what it might be like for her? So I imagined also that she too might be feeling kind of lonely and left out. The other 8 muses are artists of various kinds, right? There's 5 writers, there's a historian, there's a dancer, several types of musicians. Urania is the mathematician, she's the one who stands out, right? She's none of those things. So I thought maybe she might go looking for her people. And then if her father, Zeus, finds out that she goes looking for her people, might he be pissed off? So that's the source of the drama in the story. She has to find someone among the mortals who is able to perceive the universe in all of its grandeur and immensity and infinity, the same way that she does, without going mad. Without going mad. And whether she does or not is for you to find out when you read it. So this is published by a marvelous little Montreal company called Arcana Elements. And you can find it in all the online shops, like you can find all of my books on Googling them as well. My website is brendanmyers.net. And I'm very, very happy to be with you.
Yes, it's great. And I actually did So when I first started my YouTube channel, I was playing around with like how I wanted my format to be. And so I did a few that were just me talking off the cuff, and then I did a few that were very, very scripted, and then I did a few just talking out of my ass. And then I did a few that were kind of semi-scripted. So I've decided that semi-scripted is where I'm at, but my very scripted video I did was one of I reviewed, which I think it was Hellstone, or was it the Fellwater series? So yeah, I'm missing the fourth one somehow, but I've got these three.
Oh wow, you've got your copy of you've got one of the original copies of Clan Fianna there. I published a
I didn't buy
different.
the second one, or the second edition yet, but
Yeah, the current edition of Clan Fianna looks like this.
and then
Right, it's got the graphic design.
yeah.
And the final, the last book in the series is called Elder Down.
Yes,
and
so I don't have that one.
Yeah, that one is.
I do have Mistress of Druidry.
Oh yeah, you have Mistress of Druidry. Good job.
Pagan Testament. So. In fact, I think you signed some of these. Not this one. This one's not signed. Oh,
yeah, because I think
if there's ever an end to the pandemic and we can ever have a festival again at the Knoll, then I'll get you to sign the rest of these.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to type your website into my chat here so people can see it. So is it www or just Brenda Myers?
Both of them work, as a matter of fact.
Okay. Right now, my www doesn't work. I have to fix that. Okay. Here is Brendan's website, so you can.
There it is. Yep.
Buy any of his books.
It's .net, not .com. It's .net.
Oh, .net. Sorry. All right.
That's all right. And I see a couple of people saying thank you in the chat. Thank you, Megan Bailey. You're very welcome. I'm delighted to have joined all of you today. And
yes,
you're very welcome, Marissa.
So much. You're welcome.
You too.
Welcome back on the channel anytime. When you have your new books come out, if you'd like to come back and talk to us, maybe we can talk about climate change and some philosophical ideas about that. I'm always open to talking about Stoicism, so I would love to have you back on at any point. Yeah, anytime you have anything to plug, just let me know, and I'm happy to give you my platform. But yes, thank you so much for joining us.
You're most welcome, and thank you. I've had a great old time, and I'm glad to meet all your friends in the chat there. We will speak again.
Yes, I look forward to it. Thank you so much to my mods. You are amazing. I could not have this channel without you. Thank you so much to my subscribers. Thank you to my members. Thank you to the replay. I have trouble with that every week. Replay crew. I love you to the moon and back. You are all wonderful. This was a great evening, and I will talk to you later. Bye, pumpkins.